you know, we can look at genre historically, and let's use the crime genre to explore this possibility a little bit further. Now, because the history of this kind of movie is so vast, I want to do a brief overview only, and instead of trying to give you the history of the gangster film in a few minutes, let's take just one example of how you could use historical tools and historical thinking about the gangster movie in a very specific way to help you illuminate a genre. So the gangster film has its precedences in the pulp fiction of the 1920s, which was a period during which high-speed presses led to this explosion of mass-market books. And amongst these books, there were novels about gangsters, and these were very, very popular. They were so popular that by the 1930s, when Hollywood started focusing on making gangster pictures, there was this rich pool of literature from which to draw. But the most important historical fact about the early gangster films is that they were silent films. And this meant that they were typically about a stereotypical gangster who was American. And of course, anyone could be a gangster, but there was no real focus on ethnicity in the way we see in gangster films as it developed throughout history up until today. In other words, you didn't really get these long family histories that go back to Sicily or to some small town in Mexico. And why was this the case? Well, it's because issues of ethnicity were really hard to communicate in silent cinema. With the absence of dialogue, you couldn't put it into a couple of lines of text that would give you this huge picture in your mind. But with the introduction of sound, issues of ethnicity became paramount. And along with sound came the possibility, and this is very important historically in terms of how that gangster movies produce meaning, it was that characters could have accents. You can't hear a character's accent in silent cinema. And so, as we've seen, so many gangster films follow a person from a poor background, getting rich and powerful before falling from grace, and with the introduction of sound, this rise and fall could finally be associated with ethnicity, and most typically with the Italian immigrant. So now we see a historical shift in the kinds of stories that can be told. And so we take culture into consideration, and then we get sound and ethnicity and see how it allowed viewers to fantasize about personal empowerment and imagine themselves defying the law, while at the same time pointing the finger at who is really to blame at all the bad things in society. So the immigrant becomes revered and despised through these movies and is held up as a hero in some cases and a scapegoat at the same time. So if you look at Scarface with Al Pacino, you get exactly this sort of thing, and there are cultural issues going on, there are arguments going on about that. And their multiple purposes are being served at the same time. And the gangster movie becomes wildly popular because of this ability to show the scapegoating of an immigrant person, for example, while also making that person a hero. Very, very interesting. And this happens historically, but it isn't in the beginning of cinema, because these kinds of features, particularly accent and how that conveys messages of ethnicity, just wasn't possible in silent cinema. But notice, however, that this concentration on ethnicity in gangster movies in no way ensures any kind of accuracy about those social groups. The gangster genre has created many, many negative stereotypes that have captured the cultural imagination over time in ways that is negative and bears little or no relationship to reality. So the next time you hear an accent of an Italian or Mexican gangster, be aware that these accents are referring as much to the history of these gangsters in the movies and not really to actual real people at all. So in sum, when you're looking at a genre historically, it can tell us a lot about how and why that genre operates in our contemporary world, and it helps us understand how and why the filmmakers working in that genre are able to make the meaning that they make and influence how we perceive the world, and accuracy sometimes flies out the window. So I'd love to know your thoughts about genre and this particular historical overview. It's a way of using history to see how a genre evolved and how that it has come to create something that needs self-reference in order to make meaning, specifically with this ethnicity linked to accent. So take a moment to reflect on this and post in our Facebook group, and really look forward to hearing your thoughts about this.